She didn't remember the impact. Only the smell of smoke, the taste of blood, and the muffled sound of the siren. She was trapped, her face pressed against the steering wheel, her fingers numb. When she tried to move her head, a sharp pain struck and her breath caught. That's when she saw him for the first time, a figure running through the rain, eyes locked on her like he already knew her. Gabriel had been a paramedic for 8 years. He'd seen too much, too many things, too many people, too much loss. But there was something about that woman in a blood-stained suit and smeared makeup that froze him for half a second. And in a world where seconds saved lives, that was a lot. "You're with me now," he said, voice steady. And in that moment, her heartbeat slowed, as if it trusted that stranger without knowing why. Clara was 34, CFO of a company that occupied 3 floors of a mirrored building. She used to say love was a waste of time, and that no one made it to the top carrying flowers. But there, trapped between twisted metal and flashes of pain, all she wanted was to hear that voice again. And when his hand grabbed hers, holding tight, she realized she was crying, not from fear, but from something she couldn't explain. He managed to get her out before the car started to smoke. She was taken to the hospital, but before they left, Clara looked back and saw Gabriel, soaked, his hands covered in blood, eyes fixed on her. For some reason, she felt like it wouldn't end there. And he knew it too, even without saying a word, that this call had been different. In the following days, as she recovered, Clara tried to forget. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw those brown eyes that seemed to hold more than a record of rescues. And Gabriel, no matter how hard he tried to stay on routine, found himself looking at her chart, memorizing her full name, her address, as if each piece of info was a password to a story he didn't understand yet. The accident had passed, but the impact was only beginning. Clara returned home 2 weeks after the accident, her body stitched back together and her soul silent. The corporate world waited for her return, but she wasn't in a hurry. Everything felt distant now. Meetings, charts, goals. Even her high heels felt like they belonged to someone else. In the corner of the room, a box with belongings from the wrecked car made her avert her eyes every time she passed by. And among them, Gabriel's card, left at the hospital with a simple note: "If you ever want to talk, I'm around. G." She didn't know why she kept that note on her nightstand. Maybe it was the straightforward tone, or the "I'm around," which felt more like a promise than a message. On her 3rd sleepless night, she typed his number, but didn't have the courage to press call. Instead, she wrote, "You probably hear this a lot, but thank you for pulling me out of that car." He replied 2 minutes later, "Not everyone thanks me so sweetly at 3 a.m. The conversations continued. They started out shy, talking about the accident, her shoulder pain, how he hated weak coffee. Then the topics began to shift. Movies, fears, childhood stories. She found out he played guitar and had lost his brother in a motorcycle accident. He learned she was raised by her grandmother and had never known what it was like to have someone show up for her without wanting something in return. Their first meeting wasn't planned. Clara was at a cafe, alone, reading, when she caught that scent she now associated with the ambulance. leather, rain, and something slightly bitter. She looked up, and there he was, ordering an espresso. She smiled. He smiled back. Coincidence? He asked. Or stalking? She replied. And that's how it started. Gabriel had a calm way about him, but his eyes belonged to someone who had seen too much. Clara, used to controlling everything, felt disarmed around him. With him, she didn't have to be the flawless executive. She could laugh out loud, mess up the sushi order, admit she was terrified of storms. And for the first time in years, she felt like showing her whole self, even the parts she always kept hidden. But not everything was easy. At the hospital, Gabriel lived between emergencies. If he wasn't saving someone, he was on call, exhausted. Sometimes he disappeared for days, and that messed with Clara more than she liked to admit. She was afraid of getting attached, of waiting, of getting hurt again. And every time he vanished, the cold, armored executive resurfaced, like a defense mechanism. One night, when he took too long to reply, Clara sent a short message. I guess it was just the scare. You don't have to worry anymore. Gabriel showed up at her door half an hour later, still in his dirty uniform, eyes steady. Don't do that. Don't shut the door just because you're scared to feel. I'm trying here too. It was the first time she cried in front of him. From then on, their bond grew stronger. He started spending more time with her between shifts. She taught him how to cook a decent pasta. He took her to watch the sunrise from the hospital's helipad. They laughed together, fought over silly things, and stared at each other for long minutes in silence, as if saying things neither of them was brave enough to voice. Clara didn't understand how someone like him could be so light while carrying so much weight. It's because I know the value of every minute. I learned the hard way, he once said, as he ran his hand over the accident scars on her arm. And you? Why are you always running? He asked. She didn't answer at the time. Only days later, in a whisper, she confessed, because if I stop, I might have to feel. They both started to change. Gabriel began to open up more, talk about his brother, the guilt, the grief that never really ended. Clara began to question her own path. Did she really want that life of endless meetings? Was climbing so important if no one held her hand when she fell? But fate, that unpredictable screenwriter, had other plans. On a rainy Friday, Gabriel was called to a rescue. Overturned car, victim trapped. When he arrived, it all felt like déjà vu. Only this time, it was he who climbed into the car to save someone. And as he got out, he slipped on the wet asphalt, hitting his head hard on the side of the ambulance. Clara got the call in the middle of a meeting. She didn't think twice, dropped everything, and ran. At the hospital, the world was spinning. Gabriel was conscious, but his speech was slurred. You came, he said, trying to smile. She held his hand and said, her eyes brimming, this time, I'm the one who's going to get you out of here. The days that followed mirrored her own after the accident. Gabriel in recovery, Clara sitting by the bed, changing cold cloths, organizing medications, listening to the things he mumbled under anesthesia. Sometimes he whispered his brother's name. Other times he called for her. And it was then Clara realized she didn't want to run anymore. When he was finally discharged, she took him home, not to her place, but his. She cooked, took care of him, listened, spoke. For the first time in many years, Clara didn't want to be anywhere else. And Gabriel, even with stitches, pain, and meds, said he had never felt so whole. On the couch, with him asleep in her lap, Clara looked out the window and smiled. She didn't know what the future would bring, but she was sure of one thing. Some collisions don't happen by chance. They are the beginning of a new path. 2 months later, Clara already knew Gabriel's shifts by heart. She could tell when he'd be exhausted, when he'd sleep on the hospital couch, and when he'd show up with flowers stolen from the ER garden. He, on the other hand, already knew she startled awake at 3 a.m. on Tuesdays, hated when people forgot to close the toothpaste cap, and that behind the strong executive stance lived a girl afraid of being left behind. Some nights they said nothing. They just stayed close, hands intertwined, listening to the city's sounds. In those moments, Clara thought about the accident and wondered, what if she had died that day? She would have never known the taste of his laugh after 3 glasses of wine, or the warmth of his breath on her neck, or the feeling of being seen, truly seen, by someone. But even the strongest love carries its frailties. When Clara was invited to take a position in another city, the old armor threatened to return. "It's what I've always wanted," she said, looking at him with that fear disguised as reason. Gabriel stayed silent for several long seconds. "And what do you want now?" he asked, his voice calm. She didn't answer. She didn't know yet. In the days that followed, the silence between them grew. Gabriel, out of pride or self-protection, didn't push. Clara, torn between the past she knew and the present that was changing her, found herself at a crossroads. But deep down, she knew this choice wasn't just about work. It was about allowing herself to stay, even when life kept telling her to run. The night before the trip, Clara packed her bags. Gabriel didn't show up. No text, no call. She zipped up the suitcase and sat on the bed. Everything ready, everything in place, except nothing felt right. Her heart was tight, like it was screaming from the inside. Are you really going to let this go just like that? At 4 a.m., she got in the car and drove to the hospital. Gabriel was on the helipad, sipping coffee. The still dark sky was starting to fade into shades of blue. She stepped out of the car slowly. "You didn't come to say goodbye," she said, voice firm. He looked at her calmly. "I didn't know if you wanted me to." She took a deep breath. "I want you to stay with me. If I go, let it be together." He walked toward her, cupped her face with hands stained with coffee and work, and said softly, "You're the most unlikely and the most certain thing that's ever happened to me." She smiled, eyes wet, and replied, "It took an accident to wake me up, but it was you who taught me how to live." Months later, they rented a small apartment with a view of the city's chaos. Clara turned down the new position. She chose to open a smaller consultancy, one where she could control her time instead of being controlled by it. Gabriel kept rescuing people, but now he came home knowing someone was waiting for him, and that changed everything. They still had fears, still disagreed, were still learning to deal with scars, inside and out. But every morning when they woke up, they looked at each other with the certainty that love is also a kind of rescue. Not the kind with sirens and ambulances, but a quiet one from yourself. Sometimes life crashes two people together violently, and we call that a tragedy. But every now and then, the impact isn't the end, it's the beginning. Just like it was with Clara and Gabriel, two lives that collided in the middle of chaos and chose, against all odds, to walk side by side. And the world, with all its urgencies, became just a little more beautiful because of it. So, what would you do in Clara's place? Would you have the courage to drop everything for something that doesn't fit into a spreadsheet? Tell me, I really want to know. If this story touched you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more beauty on the way.